Isaac is still trying to join, unfortunately, but
All right. No
yeah,
worries.
and he's PM. So.
All right, that's okay. Closing government. Is your partner now on the call?
Yeah, my partner's on the call.
All right, that's okay. Opening government, once your partner joins in, please do inform us. Meanwhile, we can be doing judges' introductions. My name is Methembe, I'll be the chair. Can the panelists also introduce themselves, please?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, I'm Hillary. Congratulations for making it to the semifinals. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Emmanuella. Gyimah. I'll be your panelist for this round. Congratulations to all the teams once again, and good luck.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, my name is Ruqayyah Abbas-Yusuf. I'm a panelist for this call. Congrats on making it this far and good luck.
Give me a sec.
Hi guys, my name is Ken. I'm a panelist for this round. Congrats on making it this far. Good luck to you guys.
All right, amazing. Opening government is your partner now here. Ochi, is your partner now here?
I
think no, let me reach him. Sorry.
Yes, I am here. Yes.
Oh, he's here. He's here.
All right, perfect then. I think we can start the round. Standard BP rule shall apply with 7 minutes speaking time, first and last being protected. Please be timing yourself, but I'll also try to time from my side. If there is a panelist that can help with timestamps on the chat space, that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. With that, we'll invite the Prime Minister of the debate here.
Am I audible? Just to confirm one last
time. Yes, you are.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to start soon. I'll take POIs, preferably in my 5th minute. I'll be prioritizing POIs from closing up. All right, so with that being said.
Yeah, before you start, please, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
What about clarity? If it's clarity, would you like it to come early?
Yes, if it's about clarity, you can ask in my 2nd minute earlier as much as possible. Yeah. That being said, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, this House regrets the growing tendency of governments to delegate political authority and resource allocation decisions to autonomous artificial intelligence systems. I am not a novice. There's a reason why I reread this particular motion. We don't think this motion is technophobia. It's a defense of democracy, moral judgments, and the fragile human realities that make policy just and livable to vast majority of instances. We are not against using AI at all. We regret a very specific escalating trend tendency in the substitution of democratic, answerable human decision-making with opaque, unaccountable, algorithmic authority in that regard. What is the counterfactual we are bringing you from opening government? Our counterfactual is not a no AI. It's a world where AI is a subordinate advisory tool, not a decision maker. What that means is that in our world, AI supplies data, projections, flags like some abnormalities and some logistical optimization to some like standard. Human beings, democratically accountable ministers, elected boards and administrators retain their interpretive, like their moral and discretionary authority over these decisions. Thirdly, political risk, moral responsibility, and public contestability remain human responsibilities. But the 4th thing is that technology assists anyway. It never substitutes that political judgments that we want. The alternative preserves the benefits of AI while keeping democracy intact. This is the world we want to keep. The world we regret is their world, where AI's outputs become the decision and humans merely rubber stamp or hide behind the algorithm set so. What is the frame that I'm going to break to you and why, like everything they are going to say, is particularly non-acceptable? What was the original promise and why this delegation became politically attractive and why there's an increasing tendency? Why did government ever begin to delegate power to machines? We think because the premise was seductive and politically powerful. What this means is that 4 things. AI promised efficiency, that is faster decisions, fewer bottlenecks, and lower administrative costs. But the second thing is that it also promised objectivity. Decisions are allegedly free of nepotism or human corruption. But the third thing is that AI promised optimization, better allocation of scarce resources at scale. Also, AI promised consistency, the same rule applied uniformly. We think that promise created an irresistible political incentive to outsource difficult, morally fraught choices in that regard. What that delegation looked like was like a technocratic shortcut. That is to say that they avoid controversy, they cut costs, and they deflate accountability to a large extent in the vast majority of instances and claim that science did the hard work. We regret that shift because the promises of objectivity and efficiency paper over what politics actually does, which is adjudicate values in that regard. Why then do we regret this particular shift? 3 decisive reasons. 1, we think the delegation collapses democratic accountability because of, and the claim to this particular argument is to say, political authority is meaningful only if citizens can contest, can trace, and hold decision makers responsible. What autonomous AI does is that it severs that chain, because the analysis to this is to say that democracy needs public reasoning, you need transparency, you need people to be able to contest to decisions, you need an algorithmic, like what they do is that an algorithmic decision is produced by an opaque model architecture, and that's like usually, of course, they feed them with data. We think when welfare is denied or a budget cuts a community, who do the citizens hold accountable in that regard? It's not the machine. We think the politicians hide behind this particular machine. The ability to persuade, appeal, make exceptions, or publicly justify trade-off disappears because on their side, that algorithm's output is treated as final, and that's what happens. What is the impact to this particular claim and analysis? 4 things. 1, the legitimacy erodes. Citizens lose faith in most institutions because already, presently, we've seen a degrading and increasing loss of trust in most state institutions. What that happens is that loss of faith in institutions becomes, and that appears unchallengeable and yields like a lot of bad impacts. But the second thing is that it can raise that political anger, which can actually metamorphosize into things like people rising into pop and bringing populist ideas and like emulating a lot of people. But the third thing is that people always like bring up remedies to this, which look like protest petitions and like voting, which become blunt instruments against this particular code. The way up to this particular thing is that democratic accountability is foundational. Efficiency gains, as they say, cannot compensate for a legitimacy collapse. That makes every future policy contested and fragile. What this means is that regardless of the outcome they preach, since this is a foundational democratic legitimacy being a foundational norm of most of these societies and in a liberal society, we think this exists regardless of whatever outcome they are going to preach. But the second thing is that autonomous AI institutionalizes and scales injustice. What is the claim to this? Delegation turns historical bias into structural and a durable injustice over time. The analysis to this is 2 things. We think from what they would tell us, AI is going to learn from the past, the historical record that embeds discrimination. We think the past has always been discriminatory, right? Who got those loans, who lived where, who was more policed more heavily. We think an AI allocating resources treats pattern as truth. These biases are exemplified and frozen into systemic rules. Unlike a human, AI cannot look and see the context. That's correct statistical injustice. It cannot waste centuries of marginalization that has happened to a lot of people. The impact to this is on 3 levels. 1, a lot of rural regions, ethnic minorities, gendered communities become on their algorithm becomes deprioritized to a large extent. But the second thing is that social mobility is stunted because at the point where these things happen, like the disparity and the inequality widens into a generational phase because, of course, the analysis in the missing gap to fill this, to achieve this impact is that because there's a growing tendency, a lot of political actors do not see anything wrong with it because it has become normalized into society. It means most people will buy it and use it regardless. But it also means that a lot of people and a lot of because political actors always have an incentive to always use these things to their best of interest. It means that a lot of things are not going to be changed about it. What it means is that these impact we preach to you harden and widen to a large extent. We think the state becomes a machine of exclusionality, and these systems continue to pervade, and the harms continue to and are very irreversible at that large extent. What the way up is to say that this harm is irreversible at large scale. A decade of algorithmic exclusion cannot be undone by a short program of retraining, what they can say. Structural injustice has always happened, and we don't think it can be less compared to what they are going to say. But the third thing to know, and on large extent on the way up, is to say that panel one, democracy on a democratic legitimacy is foundational. No matter what the impacts they preach, we think that people should have an active choice in whatever decision that affects, because these policies affect most of their lives. At a point we've been able to prove to you that this is foundational, and regardless of whatever outcomes they preach, I think we've been able to do very well from Prime Minister's speech. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Prime Minister, for that fine speech. We will now invite the Leader of Opposition. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
All right, cool. So I would take my POIs in the chat. I'd appreciate it if you could just type POI, and I'll likely take it in the chat. I promise. I will take you. I'm not OG. I don't make false promises. So fine. Also, my family members will be moving a lot in the background. I'm in the dining room. So, oh, sorry, I need to time myself. According to Harold Laswell, politics is who gets what, when, and how. The problem, however, is sometimes politics is who can lobby best for what they get, how they get it, whenever they get it. Unfortunately, I think OG chooses to completely ignore the reality of the fact that a lot of times resource allocation is quite unfavorably done. And a lot of times resource allocation is quite questionably done. So even when resource allocation is done without any malintent, without any malice, there is still a question mark of, was this actually done objectively? We are going to be able to remove this from conversations and have much more faith within the system when we allow for this to happen. But note, panel, that there was a series of questions that was asked CAP in the clarifications chat on WhatsApp, because we needed to be sure from Upbench what we were doing. Because just because there is a growing tendency does not mean that it is an overwhelming overthrow of the system. We might be doing things a lot more often. It does not mean that that's the only thing we would do. What that means then is that I'm going to clarify to you the most likely instances where we would find ourselves choosing AI or delegating political authority in many situations. But I know Ella likes framing and characterization. So I'm going to do that so nobody comes to claim that we do not frame and characterize what this AI looks like on what the thing is going to play out as. What do we think these AI systems look like? I think a lot of times these AI systems are typically independent of biases. Why do we know this to be true? Right from the advent of AI, we identified very quickly that white people were injecting biases into things. And even before we started delegating things for political authority, people started calling them out. We started calling out the kind of coding mechanisms and coding techniques that kids in Harvard were using to make Black people look shit. We think what this means then is that right from the advent of artificial intelligence, a lot of work has already been done to clean out a lot of these negativities that exist within the system. But secondly, we think that there is equally a broader attempt to pump in more data that originally was missing in many of these situations. OG is right to say that some data is not trustworthy. That is why consistently there is a lot of attempts to make sure that there are conversations around whether or not the data that is being imputed is sufficient data to make said analysis. But thirdly, I think that a lot of these things can run multiple simulations. So a lot of times, and this is something you know because we all use ChatGPT now, you do not get just one response. You get a myriad of responses. So they tell you there are 3 ways you can do this. So they lay down the options available and you still have the ability to choose. My chat GPT does this to me every time. It does not always mean you have to suspend your brain and not make decisions. What this means is that there is still some reasonable amount of human involvement. I think this is very, very important clarity, and it is likely the clarity that CEO wanted to flag, because this is the only way we can have a fair debate. Because if the debate is we want AI to take over government, then a debate is not going to be about a tendency. It's going to be this house regrets the overthrow of human institutions and the replacing of human institutions with AI and technology. I don't think it would be fair for any team from GAB to push the burden of that nature on our side as up. But why do we think that this is particularly important? We think that there already is something of this nature going on in places like Singapore and South Korea, where urban planning and healthcare resource distributions are being done by AI. Why do we think that this is something that has largely been successful in these spaces? We think a lot of times the quick and split-second decision-making that needs to be done needs to have you do a combing through a lot of considerations. We think that these considerations oftentimes determine a life and death situations if they are not done quickly enough, because within 2 seconds, you can determine whether or not someone is going to die from a cut or not die. I think from our side, we are able to successfully protect these individuals because we give faster decisions. Henry.
My question is very simple. Who evolves faster, humans or AI?
Yeah, I think that regardless of whether or not you evolve faster is not the conversation. I think both parties evolve, and that is okay. But equally, at every point we need AI to improve, we improve it. So if AI is not good enough, we make it good enough. Just last year, we saw videos AI made on Sora of freaking Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it was ugly as fuck. This year, within 1 year, their progression has been so smooth that you cannot differentiate AI videos from like human videos. That's how quick AI evolves, and that's how efficiently it does. I don't think that this is a problem. But more importantly, why do we think that this is particularly a good thing? Let's talk about the nature of resource allocation, because this debate is about specifically resource allocation and political authority. But note, panel, political authority is the ability to determine how we are going to take an action. So it essentially is, how are we determining to allocate resources? What do we think the nature of resource allocation looks like? We think it's 3 things. 1, we think there are oftentimes very, very divisive and polarizing conversations. The reason why they are so is because everybody wants a reasonable level of control and a favorable distribution given to them, because there is equally a huge intention to make sure that they gain a lot. Why? What does this look like? This looks like the Basque County and Catalan in Spain consistently complaining that they do not want to share their resources with other parts of Spain. We equally think it is a zero-sum game, because the nature of resource allocation means if I give Prosper 10 cedis from the national coffers, I am effectively stripping Emmanuella of that same 10 cedis. So one person's gain is another person's loss. As a result of that, a lot of individuals try to involve themselves in the conversation in whichever way they have to involve themselves. That's why there are things like lobbying and the likes. But thirdly, we think they are oftentimes very, very political and very difficult to like objectively assess. We think that you successfully do this or circumvent all these concerns when you use AI. Why? Because AI oftentimes is one that deals with hardcore facts. The biggest push again that you will get from these guys is, oh, it is being coded by human beings. I think there is going to be a huge reason to not buy this, because we can run several tests on this AI to validate its like objectivity. I think this is likely going to be done because we equally want people to believe that it's an objective thing, because you don't just allow things to make decisions. We think that to a huge extent, they would validate this before they allow this to be like done. I think on our side of the debate, you avoid a lot of concerns and you successfully get people to get what they are needed. Very proud to break to the finals.
Thank you so much, Speaker, for that fine speech. I encourage the speakers to also be checking their time so that you don't go beyond the time. With that, we'll invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah.
Hello, guys. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. All right. So, if I'm audible, then if you have a POI, kindly unmute and ask. See you. I'll take you this time. So we'll get the clarity ready as early as possible. Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. I think there are two very big pushes from opening opposition. The first is that AI is maximally efficient, that is rid of biases. So it is best if we use AI for resource allocation. The second is that oftentimes, like, humans are shitty because AI will do most of these things fast in that particular regard. I am going to prove to you two things. The first is that even if humans are largely that terrible, we still should maintain this position. But secondly, on their side, AIs are not as effective as they seem to be. What is the clarity that you need to note within the debate first? I think Prosper questions the intelligence of CAP when they set the motion, because the motion literally says these AI are autonomous. What does autonomous mean? It means that first, it means they have the autonomous ability to make decisions. Prosper cannot say that the AIs just predict something and then the humans would ultimately make that decision. There is a clear distinction, and I'm going to show you how structurally this is applied within the world that we live in today and why this is something that is largely detrimental and terrible. This more often, meaning there is a significant risk default to this system. Why this is significantly bad is because this is a regress motion panel. There is an update in the manual. It means that all the harms cannot only be retrospective, but even if we have predictive harm, it is something that like necessarily brings regret. This growing tendency means that there is an increasing chance that most of the harms that Isaac tells you arise. But secondly, notice that it means that states are oftentimes buying into this more offense. Why? Because there has been implementation within most of these countries that signals a lot of buy-in. The tendency cannot grow without any implementation, which means that our harms are one, predictive, but two, happening within the status quo and retrospective as well. Before I go on the clarity, CEO.
No, it's OO.
Yeah, sure. Oh.
Okay, so autonomous does not mean that they implement it. Autonomous means that they make the decision without influence. The implementation is still going to be done by human beings off of the back of recommendation from AI.
Exactly. So implementation is different from deciding. What we say on our world is just allow AI to give like the myriads of solutions, but we ultimately make the decision. On their side, AIs make that decision, and that is where the delta lies. Regardless of like who implements, we think the decision is one that is crucial, because if the decision is bad, then its implementation is ultimately going to be something that is terrible. But secondly, notice that we see this all the time within the general status quo. How does this really look like? Within the security sector, we impute things like algorithms that profile like people who are most likely going to be criminals. This is based on studies of like systemic like data from such regards, i.e., if you go into the United States and most places, black people are most likely going to be profiled with these AI algorithms because they run on data. Secondly, things like on risk assessment or predictive policing, deciding where police patrols go, risk assessment, who gets bail, who gets parole, border control decisions, things like visa approval, risk flagging, and stuff like that. All these things are largely implemented within today, but the only reason why most countries are able to significantly reduce these harms is because the active decision in itself is one that lies on humans. When you give it to the AI, human discretion is something that you take out of this. But it means that even on things like resource allocation, things like who qualifies for welfare or disability benefits, all these things, AIs decide that, and we think you risk necessarily deepening the inequality harm that necessarily exists. But on AIs and biases, notice that that case from Prosper is slightly non-consequential. Why is this true? Because the same accountability metrics that they claim for why AI gets better, i.e., they are going to pressure humans to check those biases that they are imputing within the AI, is something that literally exists for the humans as well. Because humans are constantly calling these same humans to check their biases. It is unclear why the humans do not change necessarily, but they change the AIs. But secondly, notice that AI is easily corruptible. Like ChatGPT is not supposed to hold any views, but I can easily convince ChatGPT that God exists right now, and it buys that. We think to the extent where that easily corruptibility is something that can necessarily lead to massive harms when it comes to resource allocation and stuff like that. It is something that is significantly bad. But lastly, right, notice that human political bias is comparatively better. Why is this necessarily so? Human bias is visible and therefore contestable. When government misallocates resources, citizens will protest, they will vote them out, they will petition, they will challenge. Accountability is the path to corruption. AI has no accountability pathway. You cannot protest an algorithm, you cannot impeach code, you cannot negotiate with a machine. A flawed system that can be corrected will always beat a flawless machine that cannot be corrected. On their side, government can still share that responsibility. But secondly, human political instincts sometimes produce morally necessary bias. Not all bias is bad. Some bias is protective, prioritizing minorities so they don't get swallowed by majority optimization, overfunding politically sensitive regions to prevent insurgency, giving more welfare than algorithms think it's efficient, because humans ultimately feel compassion using leadership intuition to recognize when a crisis is not reflected yet in the data. This is crucial because AI only maximizes efficiency whilst human beings maximize moral utility. That efficiency punishes the vulnerable, but moral bias rather protects them. But lastly, notice that humans can interrogate things like emotion, things like history and narrative that are all vital for fairness. Fair allocation requires things: understanding of historic disadvantage, recognizing international trauma, weighing the narrative wrongs, balancing identity claims, weighing the social, it's out of order, sorry. Weighing like the social tipping point that necessarily exists. Noticing all these social tipping points are crucial. These are not things data can necessarily do. These are wisdoms. AI does not and cannot process that wisdom. Why do we win from OG? OG's word is decisively better because even if humans are flawed, even if the opposition proves that, politicians are biased, politicians are corrupt, humans misallocate resources, humans are inefficient, we will still win on two decisive reasons. The first is that human systems fail temporarily. AI systems fail permanently, but humans' misjudgment can be reversed. Algorithmic misjudgment necessarily becomes the operating system of society, since the growing trend translates into normalization. Reversibility always outweighs the efficiency. But secondly, human bias produces moral excesses that protect communities. AI would mathematically ignore, even if politicians overfund their districts or favor vulnerable groups. That bias prevents unrest, it prevents moral cohesion, corrects inequality, and respects lived experiences. AI's neutrality is the neutrality of blindness. It treats communities as data clusters and not humans. Allow government to decide.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for that fine speech. We'll now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, that is very, very brilliant. Then I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. AI and humanity can work together. That is what we're fundamentally arguing for. To say that we're completely removing people are insane, but also the OG case makes a lot of assertions. And so this is what I'm going to firstly prove, that a lot of what they're doing is just lying to us, and I'm going to take that out of the debate. Then I'll get into some new matter on legitimacy, necessity, and accountability. Cool. So the first thing that they tell us then is that the reason this has been done is efficiency, speed, and consistency. And we completely agree with that. However, their follow-up to this and their analysis behind it is then that it's because it's going to be used solely for technocratic help and to be able to bypass these systems, and this is going to be bad because people are no longer able to adjudicate values. This is a fundamental assertion because what we actually see in the vast majority of AIs, especially decision-making AIs, is that there are goals, there are values that are pre-input into these things. So if your goal is to get more access to certain communities, that is what is going to be programmed into the AI. It's weird to say that it's just going to make up its values. There has to be goals based on the political party or the government that is currently running the system. It logically doesn't make sense to do anything else. Cool. The next thing we get is democratic accountability. The thing with this is that because we're likely seeing that there are goals, there are plans, and data that is being pre-input into this, the accountability to the party that is going to be upholding this and who are putting in those still goes to that party because it is fundamentally still their policies that are being implemented. It is largely the way that it's going to be implemented that is going to be the decision-making factor and then be implemented later by the actual people, right? It's how we see it happening in Singapore with their urban planning. Because what we see is that they decide that they want to increase urban planning in certain areas because it's disadvantaged. And so how they do that is they plan for the multitude of different possibilities of what could possibly happen in those areas in the future, and then they implement it with people who've overseen and like decided that this decision that has been come to is in fact a good decision. Cool. This also allows them less it disallows them the ability to be able to hide behind the machine because fundamentally you're still programming the machine. Cool. The next thing that they tell us is less of faith in institutions. And although we think this is a very valid chat in that there is currently loss of faith in institutions, particularly political institutions, what I'm going to tell you is the reasons that we actually see this. We often see this because policy feels like it is incoherent with what the people actually need. My previous analysis already counters this, but that people think it is largely inefficient the way that it's being happening, and that there is a vast amount of corruption and nepotism in the vast majority of political systems. What the AI does is it stops a huge degree of this corruption and this nepotism and this inefficiency. Inefficiency simply because it is far quicker. It is able to make these decisions in the time that these people likely need it to be made in. And the corruption and nepotism are severely decreased because there is an increased amount of transparency, because everything is documented. It's on paper. We can see why the decisions are being made based on the programming. And also because there are less people involved to be able to take money or to take things from this and to be corrupt in that process in the very first place. Cool. The last thing that they then tell us is this idea of no progress. And I want you guys to pay attention because this is going to be like integrated into my main matter. And this is the idea that fundamentally there's not going to be progress in people, in AI, but there is going to always be progress in people. I think there is always going to be progress in people. I do not disclaim this. There is equally always going to be progress with AI because AI and humanity evolve simultaneously, right? When people are able to get more data, they're able to put it in AI systems. If anything, this is likely going to be better. At worst, it's going to be inexclusive because the data that you're putting in has to go to one system rather than go to 100-odd people and confirm that they all understand this and they're all using the data in the same way, right? And so in that chat, it's insane to say that there's likely going to be no progress, but from there, I'll diverge into my chat on accountability, right? Because it's kind of entwined. So the first thing that we need to understand about accountability is why do we have accountability? The reason that we have accountability predominantly is to stop things from happening again and to make improvements. Why do we think it's likely that we're actually going to get the goals of accountability in this instance? Because we're able to stop things incredibly quickly. One, we're able to likely catch them because we're able to see everything that's happening. You're unable to lie to us the way a person can. You're unable to like not show your data or to hide things, right? But we're also able to change a code. There is no guarantee we are able to fundamentally change the way a person thinks. There's no guarantee that the next person is likely going to think differently. When we put in a code that is different, we're able to stop these things from happening again, and so you're able to get better improvement. These are fundamentally the tenets behind accountability and the reasons why we see this as a justifiable mechanism for accountability in the very first place. I'll take CG specifically. 3, 2,
Hey guys,
1.
does AI have the moral legitimacy to make decisions on behalf of people, or on behalf of government?
Cool, I've got you. So moral legitimacy covers a couple things, but the moral legitimacy behind something is often to do with that implementation, and it's often to do with actually, it's always to do with the implementation and the reason why we're doing things. AI itself is unable to decide this. AI can very easily be programmed to decide this. This is far better because it makes it more legitimate in the sense that you're reducing any personal biases, because the types of morality and the types of goals that we're inputting into a system are absolute. We know that they're going to be maintained. We know that they're going to be kept in a way that they're unlikely to be kept by people, because the morality that we as a council and we as a government and we as a political party have all decided on is not necessarily completely coherent with what one specific person has decided is their own personal morality. It is, however, exactly one-to-one coherent with what we've programmed the AI to do, because we've told them this is the absolute morality that you will follow for this being time until we change that, right? So that covers half of my legitimacy chat of why we have like reduced biases, because we're not having individual biases. If anything, we're having the political systems biases, which are far more likely to be under scrutiny and therefore be reduced to a greater degree. But the second thing is that we're likely to see testing. And so when we see that this is going to be happening, because AI is under far more scrutiny than most people, and because it's one mechanism rather than like a lot, you're far more likely to be able to call out and fix those, making it a more legitimate process because you're far more less likely to have bias, but also it's far quicker and it accompanies a multiplicity of different approaches. And so you're likely going to need this necessity because it is the only way to save people who immediately need help, something that governments have historically always failed at. Why do we then win this debate over any other team? We're able to prove to you accountability. We're able to prove to you legitimacy, the fairness in the vulnerable actors, the likelihood of error being reduced, and increased transparency. There's no team but OO that could win this debate.
Thank you so much, Speaker, for that fine speech. That brings us to the end of the opening half. To open the closing half of the debate, we'll invite the member of government here.
Okay, hey guys, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so before I start, I just want to say like a few words. I said something fairly inappropriate in my last speech. Like to apologize to the people that were affected by those statements. I will do better next time. Other than that, yeah, can everyone hear me? My timer is set. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. The problem with open opposition's case is that in their attempt to store the softest line possible, they end up trying to inculcate the entire world and then contradict themselves. First contradiction, they claim that AI is meant to be super efficient. At the same time, AI is meant to give you multiple choices to choose from, and at the same time be free of biases. If AI gives you multiple choices to choose from as a politician, one, that means you're going to go through the entire bureaucratic process of lobbying back and forth that happens in political parties, on Senate seats, on floors, to decide which policy you're going to choose, which means it's not exactly as efficient. It's not exactly more efficient than normative policies already. You're still going to tweak it, edit it, add, remove, same level of bureaucracy. More importantly, biases. Even if it gives you unbiased results, at the point in time when people get to choose what results they want and tweak and edit them, once again, those biases will be imputed by people that are doing that tweaking and editing and choosing those results. So if you give choice, you need to accept that there will be bias. You need to accept that there will be bureaucracy and delay. If you remove choice, then you need to accept the problems that occur with that choice. Second contradiction. Once again, they say that AI is meant to be accountable, it's meant to be neutral, it's meant to be fair. Once again, if you're putting choices there, then people are not exactly neutral in making those decisions. But second of all, they say you can code or type the AI to achieve specific goals and specific targets and specific aims. This specifically comes out at the top of the DLO speech. Let me explain why this is problematic. Because what happens here is that if you can code, you can tell the AI what you want it to do, what kind of goals you're targeting, and what kind of aims you're trying to achieve. What happens is you can then target specific aims like enriching your particular community, enriching only your voters, enriching people from where you come from, or even enriching your sponsors, for instance, and then you'll present it as, guys, this is the results that came out of AI. And you can just do that subtly. For example, we want to make sure our voting constituents like put down and the rest do better. I'll take you later, right? And by the time you encode that, you get that bias, right? But you can then come up and say, hey, on the premise of accountability, we just asked it to do a developmental project for these particular sides, and then it gave us this. And then this is the result we get. So the illusion of it being AI and hence being trustworthy is then used to hide the goals of political parties at this point. Now, the claim that could exist that they would still show you the prompt doesn't exactly neutralize this, because even at the point in time where you see the prompt, they are very creative, ingenious ways to prompt to create a certain distinct outcome. So if you want to enrich white people within South Africa, for example, you can just create a policy that describes development for the highest earning populations to maximize wealth. It doesn't say anything about white people, but if you're trying to maximize ROI and return on investment by giving people more money, you're probably going to see a world where white people do get more wealth. And it's not even written on the fine print. So you can use those kind of prompts to then create those kind of results. It sounds economically logical, but it just becomes aggressively unfair. But let's get a lot deeper into deciding where AI is more likely to be used. We think, as they say, AI is probably going to be used to cut bureaucracy. Where are the places that have the most bureaucracy, and why is it important that we look at those places? We don't think bureaucracy and cutting it out by joining political power to these places is as simple as, okay, now a senator is going to make decisions to you. Is to target the areas with the most bureaucracy and process problems in handling resources. These are things like deciding the amount of funds for schools, civil service projects, and the rest. So this is more civil servant related programs. Now, usually, an elected official heads the civil service and then gets to make the decisions that the civil service executes, and then shows policies and the rest. What is happening is that the elected official then sidebars these particular needs and sidebars these particular goals to the AI to then help in making decisions and implementing these policies. There are two reasons why this is bad. One, we think that the reason why people vote you into power is not necessarily to make the most efficient use of their resources, because human beings by nature don't make the most efficient use of their resources. Every single person that is on this stage right now is not making the most efficient use of their time. I know some of you here have exams and you're literally observing and listening to us speak. Some of us have projects and things we need to get done before we start work on Monday, but we're still here doing this. What people need to do is for you to get there and do what they want. That's why they voted you into that place of power. At the point in time where you sidebar it to AI to execute specific goals or to do it for maximum efficiency, fairness, or equity, those might not necessarily be what the
POI
people want.
closing.
So, a priori, what you are doing is a deviation from what other people want. At the point in time where you say, okay, politicians are going to pull back and then re-implement these policies, then you cannot say that there is a growing trend, because that means politicians are still just going to implement the policies that people want by finding out what the people want and then implementing it, which happens without AI. So at the point in time where you say you're going to find out what people want and then do what the people want, then you no longer need to use AI. You just need surveys to figure out what people want. You did a campaign, you know what people ask you to do those shit. So that means one or two things. You need to accept you're either using AI or you're not using it. Closing opposition. Do you have anything?
Ayafa, do you have a problem with, say, Nigeria hiring foreign contractors to build our bridges and roads?
I don't see the relationship between these two things. But the more important thing is, I think we can go local, to be fair, but that's besides the point. I think the more dangerous thing outside of this, which is just like the lack of legitimacy to implement these policies, is how aggressively dehumanizing it is. The concession in today's debate is when you implement policies as a whole, these policies that are implemented oftentimes harm or target some demographics. The difference between when it's happened or it's executed by people is that you can actually go over and empathize with them. So, for example, if a school gets shut down because there is a lack of funding, people go over and say, see, guys, this is why we do this. This is lack of funding. This is the data that's backing it. This is the decision we've made. You make an active program of empathizing, and you know a human being made that decision, had difficulties in closing that decision, and then still had to do it because of how difficult those particular processes are. When AI does it, you feel like you are a number in a jet, a number on a tag, a number on a piece of paper. It's intrinsically dehumanizing, and it makes any empathy that is shown after the fact seem fake, because you know that it was made by a machine that looked at you, decided you weren't profitable or not efficient enough, and decided to devalue you. The entire problem with every single one of these processes is that it tunes people out of both caring for their government, caring for the decisions made for their government, or even being politically involved, but more importantly, just dehumanizes them by reducing them to numbers and statistics that are not worthy of empathy. At the point in time where you want to do people's will, you care about decisions that are being made and how it influences them. You always need to have a world where this AI is deprioritized.
Thank you so much, Member of Government, for that fine speech. We'll now invite the Member of Opposition. Here.
Sorry, can any of you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And I'm not in a very stable place right now, and so kindly forgive me if I'm not able to take a lot of POIs, or I'm not even able to take a POI at all. I promise Collins is going to take that POI. All right. So if I'm still audible, Methembe, can you confirm if I'm still audible?
Yes, please proceed.
All right, great. So I'm going to proceed now. Starting in 3, 2, 1. There's a fundamental problem in this debate. OG accuses OO of breaking the motion if they claim that AI decides or AI decisions will be validated by humans first. But OO also says that this is likely in their world because that's how AI works and there's AI regulation. The impact OO wants is for them to necessarily stop corruption, nepotism, lobbying, and all those other stuff. Notice that the fundamental problem with this is that it hurts their own lobbying case logically, because if there is human involvement and humans now validate or choose which of these AI outcomes we should choose, they will still choose what aligns with lobbyist incentives, which means the lobbying OOCs never vanishes. This clarity does two things in the debate. A, because DPM was trying to co-opt Prosper's case to say, oh, we can still use AI, but on our side, we choose what exists on our side. It means even if Prosper's case is true, OG have shot themselves by taking someone's non-exclusive case with a harm. That is why they lose the debate. But secondly, this also shows that Prosper's world also has the same lobbying harms. Hence, they lose the debate because there is no exclusivity on their side. That is why opening half is not going through within this debate. Prosper says he does a lot of characterization. I'm going to add that extra characterization that didn't come from Prosper on his side. So it's not that he doesn't characterize, it's that he doesn't do it well effectively to win this debate. 2 points of characterization within this debate. And I need you to pay attention to this because it's going to practically take OG out and be very key within the debate. Notice that Prosper tells you that, well, yes, this AI is trained with data. What he does not tell you is the type of data that most of these people are trained with. Notice that most of the data that most of these people are used to train this data are state exclusive data. So, for example, in Singapore, the AI they use, they don't use Ghana state data to train that AI. What this means is that it models things like preference aggregation, which is the principle that guides democracy within that instances. This is important because it mostly models what people's preferences and true needs are. So we have algorithmic monitoring and all those stuff. Notice that most times these are the same things that people vote on and guides what people consent in during democratic processes. Why do we think this is true? So, for example, predictive AI models was being used to tailor campaign messages within the US, and that's why Trump was able to win elections in 2016 and all those other stuff. This shows you that this also deals with CG's case, because if people voted for you to do what they want, it means we have preference aggregation on our side just by the creation of these models and how they are even trained within the first place. That means that that preference aggregation and what they want exists on our side on net from closing opposition. That's why we win the meta comparison. But secondly, it also proves to you that other states' data rarely affect other people's data. So this is state specific, and that means that people's consent are not impeded. You cannot say that, well, other people are making decisions for other people within the debate, which breach all other things that opening government tells you. That's why we comparatively meta the debates proper, and that's why the up bench is looking like the most sensible bench within this debate. First of all, extension proper, and here is why our extension is going to be crucial. We are saying that even if we don't check that AI, because Prosper says, well, we check the AI, we control them. We already told you, I think CJ and I have told you what the problem exists on the other side of the house. We are saying we want efficiency. We will take whatever the AI gives us. Why do we think? Because insofar as I was able to analyze with this model's preference aggregation, it means that even if it is the most of drastic outcome that exists, most times states would have done most of those things anyways, because it also does things based on things like preference aggregation that exists, and that is what democracy in of itself is built on within the debate. We don't think every state policy affects everyone and everyone starts smiling that, hey, yeah. Most people will still be hurt anyways. Why do we think this is crucial? Because there's a context you don't get from opening opposition. Notice that human decision-making capacity is inherently limited. And in the context of contemporary states which are failing, Notice that failing to augment it with AI creates structural vulnerabilities that threaten the sustainability and legitimacy of the state itself. What does contemporary problems look like within status quo? A couple of things in terms of analysis. First of all, notice that contemporary states operate across intricate networks of finance, energy, healthcare, security, and infrastructure, and each domain is interdependent. So a disruption in one can cascade into crisis somewhere. So, for example, misallocation of healthcare resources can spark things like social unrest, which will in turn destabilize things like supply chains and undermine physical stability. It means that human bureaucracies cannot integrate these interdependencies in real time. But most times, notice that national and global crises now occur at speeds unthinkable a few decades ago. So things like pandemics, climate catastrophes, cyber attacks, and financial shocks evolve within weeks or days. And notice that most of the traditional human hierarchies and even the human brain in of itself is most likely not able to mutate fastly as compared to how logistic and k-linear models are able to do within most of these semi-autonomous like AIs and all those other stuff. But thirdly, notice that modern states face asymmetrical pressure in terms of multinational corporations, rogue actors, global capital flows, and all those other stuff, which limits the extent at which most times they are able to make timely decisions, but very high personal decisions that proportionally match the extent of preference aggregation that exists to cause a net utility within most people within states. On our side of the house, what we are able to prove is that insofar as this structural inefficiency exists, we think in principle it is very evil to say that people that have the structural incapacity to take care of these complex things should still have a responsibility to do so. Because the idea behind responsibility is that you have a structural capacity and a proportional capacity to be able to execute that responsibility. And that is why we don't let children pay school fees, because we know that they don't have that capacity to be able to pay that school fees. Insofar structurally, CEO has been able to prove that the kind of problem that exists is one that most of these states cannot adequately do, and so they need to augment these things. And structurally, AI has the capacity to take care of most of these structural things, and they are most likely even going to do it better and efficiently. We think in principle, it is very terrible from opening government to say, and closing government to say, let us fail, because even if we fail, we can console all these people within that instance. Two things structurally. You cause structural harms by making most of these problems compound over time, but by not solving them in real time, by not using most of these AIs effectively. But secondly, the very people you want to protect, like minorities and all those stuff, we show how their very interest exists within this preference aggregation that exists. Notice that this principle transcends pragmatic consent, because even if AI makes occasional errors, it systematically reduces the systemic risk that human governance alone cannot mitigate due to the structural framing that I'm able to give to you. But we agree that if lobbying and everything exists on our side, we agree, but we are more able to match the preferences of most of these people, which constitutes much more utility, because utility is based on matching the preferences of people to maximize their agency. We do that on our side of the house, and that is why we comparatively win this debate from closing off here.
Thank you so much, Member of Opposition, for that fine speech. We will now invite Government Whip. Speakers, please make sure that you check your time so that you don't go beyond time. Government Whip, over to you.
I want to confirm if I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Sure. I just want to just organize my notes. Okay. I'll take a POI from Nakita Prosper. Shout outs will be in the next round. I hopefully think so. It's a Sunday. I prayed. I just don't know. But yeah, I just hope I do my best to take us there. But yeah, shout out to the Aladdin brothers and my support systems. Yeah, let's do this. Let me start on my next word. The problem with closing opposition's case is going to be a very simple one. So their case is saying that, and listen, if humans don't know how interdependence work, like CO says, then how the hell have you been able to govern society for this long? Because if your assumption is probably been doing it, I don't think they discovered AI in 1962 when Singapore got independence. They've been doing this efficiently. This is just something they've been incorporating in the system. That case is largely untrue, and I don't think it deserves to fly. But I have a couple of couple of responses to Eziel's case. There are 4 theoretical problems that probably happens with this that he never identifies. The arrow impossibility theorem. So this idea talks about that in any method of aggregating preferences, I'm talking about the AI that they use, that they're most likely going to use, which they exclusively rely on. This AI must violate at least one set of seemingly desirable fairness criteria, because you can't just simply please every fucking person. This is principally unfair and very wrong. What it means is 2 things. This AI cannot possibly go and get, and probably like Ayafa says, go get sympathy, but also make people understand the humanized area of this decision. It means there's less accountability on that side in of itself. There's a different mechanism which to accountability from opening up. Ours is way stronger because it's principle in nature. The second is on the idea of the Condorcet paradox, right? The paradox demonstrates that majority preferences can be cyclic, i.e., meaning no single opinion is a winner over all others. This violates the transitivity assumption, i.e., A is preferred to B or B being preferred to C. So A must be preferred to C. This makes it difficult to determine a clear group preference. So the 4th rule is just basically the idea of the rule of dependence. The outcome of an election simply depends on a specific aggregation rule used. So even with the same set of preferences, for example, in a particular rule, you have to specifically use a specific chart. The 4th thing is basically preference elicitation, right? The idea is that it's difficult to accurately know and define people's true preferences because A, they're ever changing, B, they're progressive, but the process of eliciting them can be very complex and competitively challenging. I think in the process, when you do this, you use a lot of time, resources, and a lot of implementation backlog. It means there's a lot of time you are wasting to implement these things. As you're wasting this time, there are people dying, there are people who need these specific things in that particular regard. Because you're using most of the money to probably use this AI aggregation, the money never goes to hospitals, to schools. You're still investing it in AI training and development. This money probably would have been able to provide probably restrict on gun policy, probably to provide reminiscences, to provide reparations for like some countries normally do. What you do in that particular regard is that because the social unrest that Eziel says is on our side is exacerbated and multiplied on their side, you create more global crisis. So it's more likely. So it's probably true that it could happen, but it's more likely to happen on their side. I'm giving mechanisms, Collins to probably give mechanisms to refute this. Second is on the idea of structural inefficiency, right? It means all these things more likely happen on their side given the lack of accuracy of the specific AI and the preference aggregation. I think on that particular regard, what this AI does, that less likely would probably talk about this debate. Let me now weigh Ayafa's case over that specific case. Ayafa's about to give you something very simple in this particular regard as to why dehumanizing this process becomes. Because when people realize their preferences have been shaped by a freaking algorithm, they understand that it is being able to, they understand that they are probably been objectified. They are more of a means to an end of policy implementation and a tool for votes. We think on principle this is very bad. Alpha gives already impacts about this. People stop caring about you because they know you're just there to get them for votes. You don't exist to care about what they really want, what their preferences are. Second is on the idea of the decision, because they know they never considered them in the decision. You never fucking ask them because you thought a piece of AI and Google searches and probably a browsing history was able to determine what those preferences are. I don't think this is true, but those things change over time. It's very complex to probably be able to evolve with those things. Philip Prosper said that is most likely going to happen. The rate at which it happens is less likely and far more complex to probably understand. I don't think CO's case probably going to be there. But then lastly, I think the extension from Ayafa is able to flip the idea as to why bureaucracy is necessary. The idea of why this becomes able to probably do this, as why civil servants to probably need you to probably be doing these specific jobs. He explains to you why efficiency is the less likely thing that people always want, because people don't really always know what they want, but also as why people always know that efficiency cannot probably be utilized. But even then, efficiency is not always the issue. The trade-off that I'm making to debate this final is exams that I'm going to be able to have in 7 days. I don't think what I want is efficiency. What I want is to be able to have the thrill and enjoyment, the happiness and self-actualization. That's why we registered for this tournament, not necessarily because it's going to be efficient in that particular regard. I don't think that's going to be the likely thing of what people want. Given that we've proven that efficiency is the less likely incentive that people want in this particular debate, we then disprove whatever closing opposition provides because all the benefits are less proximate to what people want. If this debate as a constitution is about what people most likely want and democracy, it means that debate is far from the point because you already prove what people want isn't what Eziel's case is selling. But also then, it deviates from what people actively want and have already proven that particular regard. They need to engage the specific debate. So let's first engage opening opposition because I think Ayafa's case most likely is able to flip this. The first is able to talk about the contradictions, right? Because if the soft line from like OO's case is going to be on the idea of, oh, we think that you're going to be able to still have being able to lobby and still be able to we're still going to be able to get all these like the biases and still it's still humans making the decisions. If it's humans making the decisions, why do they need the AI in the first place? I think that isn't delegation. Guys, delegation is simply definitive by dictionary, right? The idea is that you're ceding off responsibility. Methembe and Pano, if they delegate to you the authority to probably go and make negotiations, it is not the AI making those fucking negotiations. It is not your boss making those negotiations. It is you making the process of negotiating, getting the distinctions, getting all those specific things. All you have to do is to make a report, right? It means that you are the one making the active decision. You're the one making the preferences and shaping them. It is the AI doing it. So the case cannot be that it is going to be the human individual shaping what those preferences are. Even if you're delegated, I think the AI still has the ability to ensure that they change and flip those decisions given the fact of predictive analysis and where those benefits most likely do not work. I think the case is possibly going to be counterintuitive. But lastly, before I take the idea as to why it is completely unfair on the developmental patterns, why individuals now can go away from accountability. The mechanism is distinct from opening government because all opening government says that you run away from accountability. We never mechanize this. We explain to you why now leaders can no longer do these things and can simply just blame everything on AI. We think you now get populistic leaders who probably no longer have good manifestos, who don't have proper lobbying skills because AI can probably do them. You get lazy office workers who probably don't know what is best for people because they think AI can freely do that job for them. I'll take OO.
So on both sides of the debate, we have the same political leaders. If you claim that they can prompt the AI to do corrupt things, we can at least see the prompt and hold them accountable. On your side, when they use their brains to do corrupt things, we cannot see their brains and hold them accountable.
I understand that. Here is the margin. On your side, the AI is making the decision. You don't have to interrogate the leader if they can make a good decision or not. You have AI to delegate. On our side, there is no AI delegating. That's why we regret that trend. The idea is that you now also put processes to look at and assess if leaders can make good decisions or not. Something that less likely happens on your side of the debate. But then most likely what I want to talk about here is on the idea of efficiency. I think there's a bunch of contradictions there. But I think the idea is very simple, right? The most likely instances of bias. I think that there's a stalemate there's a deadlock that Ayafa breaks in the top half because OG's case is primarily on explaining why the bias exists. But I think the idea and the bias exists and the bias being really bad. OO's case is that the bias in Ubisoft can still be catered for, mitigation responses and all the like. There is no one able that is going to be able to allude why no one is able to break the deadlock in the top half to explain why this warrants regretting or not. Ayafa gives you a more proximate regret metric, which is on the idea of a principle, a priority to explain why that ought to happen. So it's beyond pragmatics. But second is the idea as to why we believe that the nature of these decisions probably becomes proximately better. Our debate is more proximate and is logically a prior to opening government, bits closing operation because they still don't understand the case, but bits opening up because they are riddled with inconsistencies in their case. We are proud to win from closing government.
Thank you so much, Government Whip. We'll now invite the Chief Whip here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. So POI is just on mute and say your team role. I would prioritize opening governments for long diagonal engagement. Eziel, I've seen what you're typing. Yeah. All right. I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So my speech is going to engage best case scenario, worst case scenario. Because I think the biggest problem with the Gov bench and especially CG from the whip speech is their lack of comparison. They're being very in comparison in today's debate. They say these are the problems that exist on our side, but they don't comparatively show you why that is better on their side. I'm going to tell you, do a little bit of comparisons. But I want to deal with CG first of all. Why do we win above CG? And I think this is very crucial. two of CG's cases, and I think there's a contradiction here. CG says it is impossible for you to tell the preferences of people because it is changing. They don't tell you how comparatively they can do that on their side. What Eziel shows to you is that in many instances, humans don't have the capacity to be able to do that in real time, to be able to collect that amount of data that allows us to be able to access all this kind of information and to be able to make the most objective decision based off of the fact that humans are often under political pressure in several instances, but also because of the fact that sometimes these data are just so bulky, it becomes very difficult for you to make the most objective decision at that point in time. But secondly, it's very crucial to observe a contradiction because they say that, oh, while these processes are happening, people are dying. But then Ayafa says, no, let's maintain bureaucracy. The problem with this is the reason why bureaucratic bottlenecks happen, because I don't think they even tell you what these impacts are. Where you have to pass through this body and that body and all of these people in your world that may not necessarily be even effective because of the kind of pressure that they're under. People are dying. They do not have the proper kind of allocations that they need for their hospitals. They don't have the kind of proper kind of funding they need for their farms and to boost their crops and to solve insecurity issues. It means if you do want to maintain that bureaucratic bottleneck, I mean, they didn't even defend that properly and tell you what that looks like or why it's effective. I think that's problematic. The one principal argument that they bring is about empathy and how we dehumanize people. A couple of things. I think it's disingenuous to imagine that AI wouldn't necessarily be able to calculate the impact of let's say people suffering. I mean, you can say that, oh, for Methembe, the AI may not be able to measure how he is feeling. But I think when it comes to governance and aggregating people's preferences and aggregating how people feel, it is very observable. It is very observable when an earthquake happens that, oh, this is how these people are impacted. We could probably allocate this kind of resources there. It is very observable that minorities have gone through this kind of historical harms in the past, and we have to correct that. All of these things are probable. All of these things are proof that we can be effective on this side. But secondly, I don't think government's ability to communicate to people and communicate the necessity of these strategy or communicate to these people to allow the kind of political apathy they say would happen on the side to not happen vanishes. I don't think government doesn't communicate to people anymore. I don't think government doesn't try to make sure that the nation is stronger or to enforce unity in that particular regard. But lastly, and this is crucially, I don't think everybody loses, because let me just give you an example of what probably would happen. Is instances where, let's say, you have to compromise. The AI is going to better be able to do that. Let's say the state of Texas with the federal allocation needs education resources this year. But you know what? Next year, we're going to have more allocation for California and on and on. All of this kind of checks and balances that make sure that there's some level of equilibrium. So not everybody loses. Yes, not everybody might get the most, but not everybody is going to lose in that particular scenario. I think AI is better able to do that, right? A couple of things in this debate about the principle. The reason why the POI Act is crucial is this. Right? The POI asks this. Let's say Nigeria, for instance, gets people from people to build their bridges, foreign contractors. The thing is, people, and this is what Eziel tells you, people consent to the states having the responsibility, the social contract, all that stuff. Not necessarily because they just consent. They consent to the value and the outcomes they will get from that, the good life, the protection, all of those kind of things is what they consent to. So it means even if you do, as a state, get contractors from outside because you're incapable in that sector to build bridges and build roads, that is still an extension of the people's consent, even if it is not the government building those roads or building those bridges. That is exactly what is the principle. What does this mean? It means that the value of the choice that OG tells you, and this is responding to them now, the value of all the choice arguments that they tell you on democracy and all of those things is an extension of how people get value and the outcome that they value that causes them to consent. Because of that value that they get on the outside of the house, that is what makes it even more likely justified. Crap, I'll take that POI with OG.
All right, so the fact that you still aggregate a lot of preferences does not equate to democratic principles, because democracy rides on active participation. If you give preferences of 100 people and they still don't choose and AI chooses for them, that is still not democracy.
The problem with opening government that I was going to get to is their first framing of assistance. And this is the principle I was going to engage. Because the thing about opening government is if you do say it is seductive and you only seclude them to be an assistant, there's a problem. Because the AI will still suggest to you on your word. The seductiveness in your side that makes it probably say it's effective would make the politicians want to choose whatever they suggest because of the fact that there's a huge bulk of data and they have a lot of pressure to make the decisions. They will still most likely choose what your AI assistant, in quotes, would prefer. So in an extension, they still are prioritizing what the choice of of the AI is. But back to what I was saying, the reason why choice is crucial is because at the end, we are amplifying people's ability to even choose more. And we can solve problems like poverty, all of those kind of things, health issues that amplifies people's ability to choose. That is why consent and social contract is an extension of value, not necessarily that states must do everything. The next thing they tell you is that states' responsibility. The problem here, and this is what Eziel explains to you, the problem we're trying to say, we preserve state responsibilities is twofold. Number one is when these states are incapable of solving these things, right, by themselves, and they cannot necessarily have AI do these things, which do is you compound the problems, which makes it even much more difficult for these states to be able to solve them in the long run. But secondly, every single attempt to do this further complicates the problem. But thirdly, they still cede responsibility. And I don't think opening government is fair enough to analyze the political bias or ideology of politicians. They will still blame it on the past administration, blame it on the next administration, blame it on their political opponents. All of these things still cede responsibility on your side of the house where they're incapable of being able to solve this particular problem. Let's talk about all that because they say AI is biased, all of that. I think that the artificial intelligence, OG talked about why AI, forget that, I won't take you. Why AI is not capable of being biased. But the truth is, the artificial intelligence that we talk about is like not ChatGPT. I think there's like various like levels of advancement to be able to ensure that they're able to weigh all these particular kind of things and delimit biases. But the problem is, even in the best case scenario, where they have the best politicians that do care, the problem is they have their own specific and political ideologies, their ability, how they were raised or how they were brought up. Democrats, Republicans, all of those kind of things shape their perception and how they see the world, how they make decisions, how they allocate resources. Even time. Is that time? So please pause my time. Am I time up? Hello?
No, you are at 6:42. You can continue.
Oh my goodness. Please, could you pause my time? That was like protected time. I don't know what that person was distracting. Please.
It was paused. You are at 6:42. You can continue from there.
All right, I'll continue in 3, 2, 1. So even the best politicians often have implicit biases because they have political bases. Prosper tells you, these decisions might be questionable. They don't tell you why it's questionable. It is because even the atmosphere of politics, Democrats, Republicans, even the best politicians, it is easy to frame because of media, all of these particular things as political decisions. Even best case scenario for OG, where AI is only assistants, because of the fact that they will still have that political leaning, they're most likely going to pick the option that best suits their political basis, making everything even much more biased on your side. Even in the best case scenario, where you have the best politicians, their framing and their mental calculus and how they make decisions is still guided by those principles. We think that the extension of consent is the value that you get from it, and people are preserved on our side. Comparatively, we win even the best version of Gov's world proud.
All right, thank you so much, Chief Whip, for that wonderful speech. Thank you, everyone, for an interesting round of debate. This brings us